Supporters of Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro have been taking to the streets in efforts to overthrow the country's democratic institutions. According to Intercept reporter Andrew Fishman, organizers there were calling for a military coup to close the Supreme Court and Congress and begin a general cleansing process in Brazil. It fizzled out a bit, but they're still pushing. Andrew, I saw on kind of Brazilian Twitter that they were calling it the flop. What was the Portuguese term that they used to describe the kind of light showing that Bolsonaro got for his effort that he was organizing that was sort of talked about here as kind of an attempted repeat of January 6th?
Yeah, there's a war of narratives. I mean, the people that are against Bolsonaro said that it flopped. And because, they were expecting millions of people out in the streets in Brasilia, in Sao Paulo, and basically every other capital. They only had people in 15 out of 27 capitals. And in Sao Paulo, the official estimate for the attendance was only 6% of what the organizers were estimating. So they say that it flopped, but you still had, more than 100,000 people out in the streets in Sao Paulo.
So do you think his popular support, is reflected in that flop, or do you think there's still a lot more popular support than is being out there? Because that's kind of what we saw here, right? Polls said Donald Trump is down, and then we saw a surge. Is it a similar dynamic with Bolsonaro as well?
Yeah, Bolsonaro has his solid base that he's basically never going to lose no matter what. Right now, he's got a 24% approval rating. That's gone down dramatically from, throughout his presidency, even, in the middle of the, some of the worst of the COVID crisis, he had a much, much higher approval rating, but there's been a series of political scandals. There's been a lot of negative press. He's, alienated a lot of supporters through different things that he's done, and him pulling back from the coup rhetoric from last week's protests has alienated even more supporters. But he still has a lot of people that really love his message and love who he is, and would like to see him stay in power, whether or not he can win an election.
So regarding this, the idea that he's trying to, or his supporters are trying to overthrow democratic institutions in Brazil, and so Brazil doesn't exactly have the best track record when it comes to, being a pillar of democracy. I mean, we had Operation Car Wash. We've seen a lot of corruption even within the courts. I mean, they don't have a long heritage of wonderful institutions, wonderful democracy. And all of a sudden, Bolsonaro comes in and he's like this Trump-like figure, and he's doing what Trump did on January 6th, and he's trying to overthrow all of this that's gone on there. Obviously, it's a very different country than here. What is your take on that aspect of it? I mean, do you really think that this is a, attempted coup or overthrow of democracy, or does he have maybe some points considering Brazil's sordid history?
I mean, Brazil had a military dictatorship from 1964 to 1985 that's supported by the United States. And there was a negotiated transition of redemocratization. So the military still has maintained a significant amount of power in Brazil throughout that time. There's been a lot of, rejection of democratic politics because of the media narrative behind Operation Car Wash that was, basically painting all politicians as corrupt. And Bolsonaro really rode that wave and pressed that. So, but it's clear that he's been saying, since well before he was running for president, that he doesn't necessarily believe in democracy. He's always said that the military dictatorship was a great period, that he admires the leaders, he admires the people that were responsible for torture, and that, he gave a famous interview, I think in 1999, where he said that Brazil needs a civil war and they need to kill more people than they killed during the military dictatorship. You need to kill at least 30,000 people so you can push through the things that you want. He said that the things that Brazil needs can never be done democratically. And so that's been his message since the very beginning. That's been his message repeatedly, and he's ramped that up in the past few weeks. And his supporters, very much support that. They were out there holding signs saying, close the Supreme Court. We want military intervention now. And there was a fake news story that went out amongst the Bolsonaro WhatsApp and Telegram groups saying that Bolsonaro had declared martial law the day after, or the evening of the September 7th rally. And there's video of them all cheering and jumping for joy and being totally ebullient because they thought that it finally happened, that the coup was beginning. It was fake, it didn't happen, and he ended up pulling back the day after lots of pressure from political institutions. And after that, you saw these same people being extremely mad at Bolsonaro and saying that he deceived them, and that you couldn't trust him, and that he was basically the equivalent of a cuck. And so it's clear that his base definitely wants a non-democratic intervention because they see that he's not going to be able to win the next election.
And so can you talk a little bit about that moment, those few crucial hours where kind of the right thought that they had won this victory, that Bolsonaro had sided with them and declared some emergency rule, but then backed off in the face of these institutions, which Kim rightly says are fragile. How were the institutions able to push back and hold on so far?
Yeah, so I mean, some people have tried to downplay the significance of September 7th, but in the night before, all of the supporters had descended on Brasilia, and Brasilia is where they were worried there was going to be an invasion of the Supreme Court of the Congress. The police set up barricades, and the police allowed protesters to go through. There was some confusion going on. And you saw these videos of, drunken, reveling supporters that were cutting wires and opening up signs and removing barricades and just being allowed to walk through without any pepper spray or tear gas. And the Supreme Court, the president of the Supreme Court was extremely concerned, and he was apparently called the governor of Brasilia, asking for more police support. They took people off from vacation and brought them in to do reinforcements. And he told him and representatives of the presidency that if there was an attack or an invasion, that he was going to ask for the military to be called in to defend the Supreme Court, just to show, how serious the leader of the Supreme Court was taking the situation. The day of the protest, there was multiple attempts to try to break through the barricades, but they were reinforced, and they used tear gas, and they were able to repel them. The day after, there was an attempt to invade the health ministry by a small group of Bolsonaro supporters that were pushed back by security guards. As soon as one of the major supporters of this movement had been truckers, organized truckers movements, and they started doing roadblocks, blocking the highways in multiple states across Brazil. And there was a massive trucker strike that happened in 2018 that was, crippled the country because there's no rail infrastructure. Basically, everything comes through trucks, food, oil, gasoline, and so it was very traumatic when it happened then, and there was a lot of fear about that. And that was actually one of the things that Bolsonaro feared, that he was no longer able to keep control of his supporters, that they were going to take it out of hand. And so, they were pushing forward. They were listening to the rhetoric that he was saying. It's not clear why Bolsonaro, what didn't adhere to his more dramatic and aggressive coup rhetoric, and why he backed down in those hours, still to be reported. But the supporters wanted to keep pushing forward, and they were accelerating. And at the same time, there was this coalition from the center-right, oligarch parties that came in, and they did an intervention with the Supreme Court and with the president to try to make this brokered truce. Actually, the former president, Michel Temer, wrote a letter that Bolsonaro published that kind of de-escalated the tension, saying that he didn't say sorry, but he said he didn't really mean it, and it was just lots of emotions, and he never meant to offend the Supreme Court. Whereas at the rally in Sao Paulo, he said that one of the Supreme Court ministers was a scoundrel, and that that he was no longer going to listen to Supreme Court decisions, which basically breaking with democratic norms.
Right. And so at the end of August, you had a piece come out about Brazil's agribusiness, mining, and lumber industries, and international backers who were aligned with Bolsonaro that were looking to develop pieces of land in the Amazon. This led to Brazil's largest ever indigenous protest. Can you tell us what came of this?
Yeah, actually, this is still ongoing. Right now, what the indigenous groups are saying is the most consequential Supreme Court ruling in the history of Brazil. That basically there's a case before the Supreme Court where an indigenous group was pushed off their land through violent paramilitary gangs decades ago, and they are trying to establish the rights to their ancestral territories. But some of that land was given to farmers. And so there's this contest in the court where the farmers are saying, well, they didn't occupy the land in 1988, the day that the Constitution was signed. So therefore, it's not their land. And they want this to be a precedent for the rest of Brazil because, through decades and centuries of genocide and armed violence against indigenous groups, they've been pushed back and pushed off their lands. And, according to the Constitution, indigenous rights predate the Constitution. So if this thesis, this is called the milestone thesis, that the agribusiness is pushing were to pass, then it would massively roll back indigenous land rights. And it would be, for many groups, it would be what they say genocidal. And I believe that's correct, because there's lots of tribes, indigenous groups that have never been contacted, that if they get in contact with one person with a flu, it could wipe out their entire population. And so that's why these territories exist. And they're also the strongest protections, environmental protections in Brazil, because you can see on satellite maps, the line where the indigenous territory is, it's all deforested and cow grazing pasture, and then on the indigenous side, it's completely preserved. And so right now, these territories are under attack. There's tens of thousands of illegal miners and loggers and farmers that are invading these lands because they're very valuable. They want to exploit them. But we're on the precipice right now of what scientists consider an irreversible tipping point in the Amazon. They say that if between 20 to 25% of the Amazon is deforested, it could lead to an environmental collapse that would lead to it becoming a savanna. And right now, we're at 18% deforestation. So there was a massive historic protest in Brasilia of 6,000 representatives of 176 indigenous groups, which is half of the groups in the country. 6,000 it doesn't sound like a lot for a protest. We have to consider there's only 900,000 indigenous people in Brazil, and many of them had to drive 4 days over dirt roads, risking being attacked by paramilitary groups that are trying to encroach on their land, to come together to make this protest. And the Supreme Court keeps pushing back the ruling under pressure from the agro lobby, because the lobby would rather that the Congress make this decision rather than the court, because the Congress the agro lobby has a majority in Congress, and the court, going by the Constitution, is almost guaranteed to reject their premise. And so it's very consequential. It's very important. It's just kind of been dragging on, and this protest encampment is still there, and they're still waiting until a decision is made. If
Bolsonaro does lose, and if the indigenous groups can win in this Supreme Court case, is there a possibility of expanding the size of the Amazon and reversing some of this damage, or are we in a death cycle and it will be a savanna kind of in our lifetimes? Because if you look at it laterally, it's and you compare it to where it is, where it is laterally, say in Africa, it easily could become just desert.
I mean, I'm not a scientist, but the signs don't look very good. Right now, under the Bolsonaro government, the rate of deforestation has increased dramatically. Under the Workers' Party, under the center-left party of Lula and Dilma, they were able to reduce the rate of deforestation, but it was still too high. Mm-hmm. And they, were allied with the agro lobby as well, because you basically need them to have a governing coalition in Brazil. And with that being the case, it's difficult to imagine that anyone would be able to come into office and completely turn things around and stop this before you get past the tipping point. If the tipping point is what scientists believe it is, because 18% to 20%, it's not a whole lot. And there's not a massive movement to reverse these what's happened so far. And there is, the agricultural lobby is the biggest industry in Brazil. It's the biggest exporter. They're very wealthy. They're doing great with the dollar high and the Brazilian currency low. So they have a lot of money to lobby, and all of that doesn't look very good.
Well, all of that sucks. But Andrew, thank you for joining us anyway.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
We'll have more Rising up next.